Good evening. My name is Linda Bird, and I'm the Director of Programs and Services for the Alzheimer's Society of Nova Scotia. And it's my pleasure to host tonight's event, highlighting the film clips from the documentary film Dementia, Dad and Me, along with discussion with our two special guests. We've been 18 months of living with this restrictions of a worldwide pandemic, and I'm very proud that we've been able to adapt to bring content like tonight to you using this virtual platform. We're delighted to welcome so many people here tonight, learning together, connecting people with dementia, family members, general public, and healthcare staff from across the province, and even some colleagues from across Canada. Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we are gathered on sacred land that has been the site of human activity since time immemorial. We are in Mi'kmaq, the ancestor and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and we acknowledge them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. This evening, we're going to feature 3 film clips, each about 5 to 6 minutes long, from the documentary film Dementia, Dad and Me, followed by short discussions with our 2 special guests, Impact film producer Hannah Minzloff, whose family is the subject of the documentary, and Alison Dixon, a Halifax geriatrician with a clinical focus on dementia and Parkinson's disease. As you watch and hear the discussion, please type your questions into the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. And we'll address as many questions as we can during the final segment of the evening. So I'm just going to do a brief introduction of both of our guests. In the gold sweater on my left, maybe your right, is Hannah Minzloff. She's a photographer and filmmaker living and working in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. She is a dynamic, highly regarded community leader and is a co-owner of Truffaut Films. Hannah's projects expand our understanding, change perspectives, and challenge people to take action. Hannah is currently collaborating with the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and Dalhousie University to develop engagement tools to accompany her film, Dementia, Dad and Me. Alison, on my right or your left, in the darker sweater, is a geriatrician in Halifax. She completed her medical school and resident training in internal medicine at geriatric medicine at Dalhousie University. Before medicine, she was a journalist and worked for the CBC as a reporter, and just found out tonight she worked on Street Sense, so some may recognize her from Street Sense. When she's not running after her 3 small children, her interests include dementia and movement disorders in older adults in Parkinson's disease. Before we start, we have a short evaluation at the end of the evening to get you warmed up and make sure it works properly. We're going to ask you to complete the poll that's going to appear on your screen. There are just 2 questions. This lets us know who's coming from where. We've got lots of answers coming in. So we have lots of partners in care and healthcare professionals. We have people from Central, Western, Eastern, Northern, and other provinces in the country. So great to see everybody here and welcome everybody. That's great to let us know who's in the audience. So to begin tonight, we're going to start with the first clip. It's to watch the beginning of the film where we are introduced to Reiner, Hannah's dad.
Dad, can you introduce yourself to the camera?
No.
Can you say what your name is? What's your name?
You have to start again.
Can you tell me what your name is?
Yes, my name is Hannah Minzloff.
And when were you born, Dad?
Pardon?
When were you born?
Oh, 1935
And what city were you born in?
in Berlin.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it sound much better if I said I was born in Berlin in 1935?
Sure.
And Papa just started his career as a cameraman. Während des Krieges waren wir dauernd in Bombenangriffen. Tante Grete hatte in der Nähe von Berlin, 80 Kilometer südlich, einen Bauernhof. Dann hat Papa mit Tante Grete ein Vereinbaren gehabt, dass wir dort wohnen konnten. Da waren polnische Arbeiter,
Ja,
Kriegsgefangene.
genau.
Und die kamen am Wochenende, am Samstag und haben uns die Haare geschnitten. Man konnte schon die Explosionen der Front hören. Wir sind dann losgefahren und auf einem Lastwagen. Das war am 23. Februar 1945. Zum Teil fanden wir das aufregend. Jetzt habe ich vergessen, ob ich das alles auf Deutsch oder auf Englisch erzählt habe.
Deutsch.
Well, I don't like seeing people's feet cut off constantly. And just a little bit of attention, you can lift it up or make it a tiny bit smaller. People don't notice, but it does make, to me, it makes a difference.
Mein lieber Papa und alle anderen Lieben. I arrived safely on the ship and slept well the first night. We left at 11:45 p.m. The steamer let off at least 8 very loud blasts. Music? This was not. My cabin is very nice. There is plenty of food. Many greetings. Reiner.
I only came with $50, but then things were not so expensive. You could buy a week's supply of groceries for $5.
Did you have any idea what your life might be like when you emigrated, when you were 23?
No, none. None at all. It was just a total come and find out what it's like attitude.
So, Dad, tell me, what's important to you about the photographs that you have?
What's important to me? Talking on command like that is not, it's not very easy. Well, most photographs are done on the spirit of the moment.
Welcome back, everyone. That was a lovely way to start the video. And I'm going to pose questions to both Hannah and Dr. Dixon. So my first question, Hannah, is there were a couple of times in the first part of this video where you've asked your father a question and instead of rushing in, you've waited patiently for a response. So my question is, did you do this naturally, or is this something you had to learn?
That's a great question. And what I realized is that Dad always took his time when he was answering our questions, and we would often talk over him just in general. And so in my lifetime, I learned to pause and listen. So that was a little bit natural with Dad, but not for that long. So as a filmmaker, I learned that one of the most important things you can gift the person that you're interviewing is quiet and time. And you ask a question and then you just wait and listen. And it doesn't matter how long the silence is, because it gives them time to think. And, you know, as we've all learned in Zoom, there's a lot of that happens with no talking, no wrestling. And I think my dad really valued that, that really active listening, and it enabled him to gather his thoughts and to think about what he wanted to say.
Thank you. So sort of a parallel question, Dr. Dixon. I know that with the symptoms of the disease, sometimes people finding the right words, they need more time. What happens if we rush in and try to fill the empty spaces?
Well, as you described, Linda, there are so many communication changes that can happen in dementia. So what Reiner was experiencing, there's a slowness of generating the spontaneous conversation and words. For some people, it's word finding difficulty. For some people, it may be speech comprehension, joining in and following in conversations that are occurring rapidly. So rushing in, as you can imagine, we all feel the same way. It's frustrating when you're trying to generate a word or a thought and somebody jumps in before you've had a chance to finish that word or thought. It can be very uncomfortable. It can be frustrating, and it can be agitating for people to have that experience. So it was beautiful, exactly what Hannah did, to take that time and allow Reiner to have his time to generate his thoughts, to speak. I think we need to be sensitive. It's a very person-centered approach, and it may be different for different people, but finding, a quiet room, a place where there's not a lot of distractions, particularly if somebody has hearing impairment as well, and allowing that time and being sensitive that for people, maybe a certain time of day or a bad day or a good day, they may have more word finding difficulty or take a little more time in conversation. And I think we just have to adapt and be patient to truly to be good listeners and good communicators.
So it's really a skill as care providers to learn to just take it easy and give a person the opportunity to respond.
Absolutely.
The other thing that stuck out to me too, Hannah, when I was watching this film, was that you went through a lot of the older photographs with your dad from his earlier life. Did you learn anything new about your dad as you're taking the time to go through those photographs?
I did. I found all sorts of interesting photographs. And what I loved about the way my dad accesses a story is that it was often kind of sideways. We might look at a photograph of him rowing as a young man in his mid to late teens, but then it would generate a conversation about socks because he was wearing these really crazy socks. And so he might remember something totally different. But that photograph really had acted like a key to unlock this treasure chest of memories. So I learned all sorts of new things about my dad.
And this is a follow-up question to that. Did that help as he progressed through the disease, learning that kinds of things that he was interested or valued?
Yes, it did, because I would remember or often write down what he had talked about with those photographs. And so if I showed them to him again, he might not have remembered that particular thing, or I might say, we looked at this sometime before and you were talking about the crazy socks you were wearing in that picture. and who gave them to you. And, sometimes he would then remember something else, or he would say, oh, yes, or he might not remember then, but the next time we looked at the picture, he'd say, oh, yeah, the last time we looked at that, we were talking about my crazy socks. And so you never really knew what story would come out from looking at the different pictures. And I loved that because it wasn't like he was just repeating the same things over and over. They would somehow access a different part of his brain depending on, or his memory, depending on the day. And just like Alison was saying, if he was tired or stressed, or if it was very noisy, or if we were in a busy place, Dad was hard of hearing and wore hearing aids. So he found an atmosphere like going out to a restaurant or a coffee shop really difficult. So we always had to find a spot where we weren't sitting right under the speakers, or a time of day when it wasn't really busy. And, later on in his house, it was very easy because my parents are very quiet people. But later on in the nursing homes, sometimes that was a bit more challenging, or we would just go and sit quietly in his room.
Thank you. One of the other things that came out of that clip too, Dr. Dixon, was that Reiner had started to speak his native language, German. Is that common as people progress through dementia?
It's interesting because it is something we do see, and probably a lot of people here tonight have had that experience in their lives as well. It's a very complex question, though, and there are some theories about why that happens. Probably the best explanation would be it's almost like a first in, last out phenomenon. So that first language you learn has very robust neural connections, and that offers some protection against the memory changes that happen. And so there's something different about the first language that's learned that's protective. We also use other parts of our cognition, namely executive function, especially for people who are bilingual and trilingual, to switch back and forth between languages. And that's quite a highly demanding function to do. And some people have impairment in that organization, planning, multitasking, and shifting. And so that could be a factor as well. But I think the best way to understand it is that first in, last out, that there's some deep protection there, but it's not true for all dementias. So we do see some very prominent language dementias where first languages are affected as well. But what Reiner is experiencing is something we definitely see. And I'm sure people here tonight would identify that with that.
The next couple of questions have come in through our chat line, so thank you for sending the questions in.
Linda, I'm just going to say one quick thing about Dad and his language. He taught me how to speak German because he always spoke German to me in the house as I was growing up. He was really determined to share that with me. And because I didn't have perfect German and heard English and French in my world all the time, I always flipped backwards and forwards. And so what was interesting to me is that he, in his older age and his last 10 to 5 years, he still carried on flipping backwards and forwards. And he had a harder time finding his words in German because it had been such a long time. He was only 23 when he emigrated to Canada. So I found it fascinating that right up until the end of his life, he would spontaneously flip backwards and forwards. And our conversation would proceed in whatever language the last word was uttered in by one of us until we couldn't think of the next word, and then it would switch to the other language. Wow.
So here's a question. I don't know who wants to answer this, but maybe we can have a medical opinion and a family perspective, but what happens to one's appetite as one progresses with Parkinson's or dementia? Who wants to step in on that?
I can jump in there first if you'd like. It's very different for a lot of people, but generally as things progress, we would see some weight loss and some appetite being affected. Oftentimes, something we may see is people losing weight, especially if they're living alone, because it becomes difficult to prepare meals. So to organize and plan and make meals yourself, but say if you had them over for supper and prepared a meal, that the appetite would be there and they would clear their plate. So it's not exactly a problem with appetite, but it may be just that finding and seeking meals and being able to prepare them, taking that initiative. But as the disease progresses, many people do lose weight. That would be pretty common. In Parkinson's as well, there are swallowing difficulties that can happen, and that definitely impacts our food intake as time goes on.
So it sounds like the bottom line, if you're concerned about appetite, you should talk to your family doctor.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Hannah, did you notice if your dad did his appetite change as he progressed through?
It sure did. And I think that that aligns with your energy levels because they decrease. You know, you're not moving as much. He would spend much more time just sitting quietly, very introspective. And so he wasn't using as much energy and then wasn't as hungry. As a young man, he would eat 2 plates of his dinner. You know, he would never just have 1 plate of dinner. So I remember that as a young girl growing up with my dad, you know, and I was very excited when I was in my late teens and I could finally eat as much as my dad. So his appetite really did change quite a lot. And he did lose some weight, not in a concerning way, but, you know, he was less active, and he still loved his food. He was very disappointed at the last year or so of his life with the food in the nursing home because it wasn't anything like my mom's home cooking.
Nothing ever is, right? The home cooking. Somebody else wrote in and said, your dad appears very jovial in the clip. Was that his personality always, or did that change?
He always loved a good laugh and was deeply shy and so often would have sort of a nervous giggle. He was a very introspective and quiet person and a really good listener. And so what I noticed is that when he laughed, his whole face lit up. And as the dementia and Parkinson's progressed, his face got more and more wooden and expressionless. And so I really missed his huge beaming smile that would reach his eyes. And so we knew we'd really gotten to him in the last few months, you know, when there was a little gleam, but it wasn't nearly anything as dramatic as his expressions had been as a young person. He was a redhead, so he also had a fiery temper. And I have to say that anger completely left him as the dementia progressed, which was quite nice.
Dr. Dixon, do you want to comment about personality changes as people go through the disease?
I think it's very specific to the person with dementia. So I think a lot of people probably have very different experiences, even who are here tonight, with some people having a loss of anger and other tendencies. And for some people who have never had issues at all with feeling angry, become quite irritable and quicker to frustrate. So we see that quite often. It's very person dependent.
And that's an excellent point. I have to admit, I've watched the film several times, Hannah, and every time I get something different out of it. It is one family story, but it's a great jumping point to have conversations about personality change and things. And I think it's invaluable for that. I think we'll go on to the next clip. The next clip we're going to watch features Hannah's mom and as Reiner's progression with the disease. So we'll join you in a few minutes.
I had 2 bowls of broth and 2 jellos for supper. And I said, can I make myself a piece of toast with peanut butter? No, you're on a low residue diet.
What diet?
Residue. So that means in case I have this procedure tomorrow, they don't know.
So does this mean she had an operation?
Dad is devastated by Mom's cancer diagnosis, and we've seen a steady decline in his health and mobility, particularly in the last few weeks. He appears much more fragile to me now, and the Parkinson's is making him very unsteady. Cognitively, some days are much better than others. Just this week, he has been wandering around the house at night, a sign that he is moving on to the next stage of Lewy body dementia. I think we're going to have to move him to a care facility much sooner than anyone expected, as Mum and the family will not be able to handle the overnight care.
I got a very special greeting
Oh, yes?
from Sophia.
Nice.
I'll take the flowers and the bags, and then I'll come back for you and Mum. So Mum's back from the hospital, and Dad is so happy. There's a lot to do. I'll be calling the Caregivers Nova Scotia to see what extra care we can put into place so that Mum doesn't have to make any meals. Whose turn is it? Dad suggested that we get Meals on Wheels. So I've done that. They're getting a meal Monday, Wednesday, Friday at lunchtime, and they'll probably have that for supper.
Can you translate it out?
And maybe on Wednesday I can start sleeping at home again, which would be great. I miss my family and my house and my bed. And snuggling with John at night, I really miss that.
So I need 3 letters, please.
What do you need?
I was looking for my coffee.
It's in your hand. As you all already know, Mum is amazing, and nothing is stopping her from enjoying the garden and a few days out. What do you like about being at the beach, Dad?
Man sitzt und du kannst dir ausdenken, worüber du nachdenken willst.
Well, it's 5:30 in the morning, and I just got a call from Mum to say that Dad's been sitting up all night, and his legs are really swollen, and he won't lay down, and she can't help him to lay down because he's too heavy. And so she's asked me to come up and give her a hand. So I'm doing that.
Which legs are you talking about?
He's so hot. I had to call VON yesterday. So we've had a really, really bad 24 hours. Just absolutely exhausting.
It's 6:49, and I think I've got everybody settled.
Thank you very much indeed for calling back. We'll do that. We've got to take him by ambulance, obviously, to emerge, and he's got something called Proteus mirabilis, and this is resistant to nitrofurantoin and tetracycline. These are the 2 antibiotics.
So what does he have?
Some infection of his bladder.
So we need to call 911 then?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, Dad. You have a urinary tract infection, so we're going to take you to the hospital, and they'll give you some medicine, and you'll be feeling much better very soon, okay?
You still got your drain in. It was a good colour.
It's a very good color.
Yeah.
It's much better than it was earlier. Dad has been in hospital since Saturday. We're visiting daily, bringing treats and photos to cheer him up. I found that today in the Ile de la Madeleine cupboard in Mum's bedroom. Did you see the photos that are in it? You have to go to the very beginning. Ist das deine Oma?
Ja.
What did you call them, Dad?
Same as the others.
Oma und Opapa?
Ja, aber mit Michaelis.
Also Oma Michaelis und Opapa Michaelis?
Yeah. Where is that picture? Is that car? So this is a car that was supplied by the army for Papa. Because it was in the war, you needed to have always a permit.
To drive anywhere?
No, not so much to drive, but to have permission to use the equipment. And they were shot at wherever he was.
It's amazing, Dad, how these photographs bring memories back so clearly for you.
Welcome back again. That video clip was a little harder to watch than the first one, Hannah. So the first question I have for you, Hannah, is the clip shows the difficulty and reality of being a daughter caring for two aging parents and a mother and a spouse caring for your daughter and your husband. There was discussion earlier in the film about getting Meals on Wheels. So the question is, was it hard for the family to accept help from beyond the intimate family members?
I'd say yes. My mom would regularly cancel the home help that was coming in through various companies. That was all organized by Continuing Care in Nova Scotia. And then I would have to come in, or I'd have to call a friend or a cousin to pop in, but usually that was me. Sometimes the caregivers cancel, and then there's no, for whatever reasons, they can't make it. So that was also a challenge. But they did have a hard time accepting support. And, things like Meals on Wheels, they found delightful. The people were really nice. They loved the help that came, but it wasn't really the kind of food that they liked. And so they would eat it, but it wasn't a meal that they loved. And Mom would end up augmenting it with various vegetables and salads and things. So it wasn't as much work as preparing a whole meal. But she still would, they wouldn't have it at lunch when it arrived hot. She'd put it in the fridge or in the freezer even, and they'd reheat it and possibly share one of the meals and then have, a couple of meals from them and reheat it for supper. So it wasn't a no work situation, the Meals on Wheels. But yeah, they found it very difficult. My dad found the hardest thing for him was everybody put something somewhere else and he didn't know where to find stuff, or that they would not know his routine. And so they'd kind of just, watch him doing things. And he found that kind of irritating because he's like, well, you're supposed to be helping me. And I would say, well, it's actually good that you're doing this yourself, Dad, making your lunch and showing them where everything is. It's keeping you, mentally and physically active.
Would you have, just to follow up on that, would you have any advice for other families going through this when family members are a little resistant to accepting outside help? You were called on if the help wasn't there?
I can't imagine for families where there isn't a person or they're not right there in that same town or even province as their loved one who needs care. Try to find the best alignment that you can. Be patient. Know that you're going to be really grumpy with person because they cancel things or they turn things down or they say no right when you think you've got it all organized. Be really excited when the people come and it all goes really well.
Yeah.
But I'd say it really is, it's an exercise in patience. And so what I did is I created a binder. So it had all the information in plastic sleeves about all the contact information, doctors, emergency numbers, health cards, what the issues were with each person, and then also their schedule for the day and what we were expecting that person to do to help on that day. And I tried to make it quite regular so that, every Tuesday, someone would help with the washing because they were allowed to do that. Or, whatever the tasks were, try to lay them out. And then often it was a new person coming each time. So that binder they found really helpful.
Good strategy.
Yeah. And it, had some basic things of where to find things in the house as well.
Okay. Dr. Dixon, this question's for you. Reiner is unsteady on his feet. Can you elaborate how Parkinson's or other types of dementia can affect someone's balance and things we need to be aware of to put in place to help maintain his independence?
So there are quite a few reasons, in particular when you have Parkinson's, that your balance is impaired, but there is a slowness and a stiffness of the muscles. There's a loss of some of our postural reflex, so our ability to balance and right ourselves if we are off balance. There can be fluctuations in blood pressure in Parkinson's that put us at risk of falls, especially when we first stand up. And there's also a change in how we perceive our visual spatial perception. So our depth perception, how we perceive the world around us. People can also experience hallucinations and may think something's on the floor when it's not and go to step over it. So there are many reasons that people are at a high risk of falls with Parkinson's disease and other Parkinson's conditions. I think the best way to support that is really through a healthcare team that's very broad. So physiotherapy is something we recommend a lot and is really essential. That might be assessing somebody for a walker or a cane as they need it to help with balance. We also often ask for occupational therapy input. So to go to people's homes at times and assess any fall risks there, whether that's something like throw rugs that are around the home in the kitchen, or whether somebody needs a bar in an area of the bathroom or a seat in the shower. So we really need to tailor our response to falls and fall risks depending on the person, but it usually involves a very broad range of specialty healthcare input, and often a big team is involved.
And again, everyone's different, and depending on their abilities, depends on what services are going to be able to help them. Hannah, a question came through to ask how much time elapsed between the first clip and the second clip. I know this is your complete film is 71 minutes, so in years, how much time is between the first and second clip?
That's a really good question. I think it's probably about 3 years. It's not all 100% linear in the travels through the film, but it is fairly linear. And some of the audio that you hear my dad saying over the collage of photographs is actually from an interview I did with him in 2005, before he showed any obvious symptoms of either Parkinson's or dementia. And I'm so glad I had the opportunity to interview him back then for a different photo project. And he was so candid about his experiences. And actually, I think in the next clip that we're going to see, you'll hear some of these incredibly candid thoughts of his. And I won't say any more than that, but what you hear him saying in the next clip, some of that is from 2005. So that's good to keep in mind. But
we'll keep that thought.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
When he was in the hospital, though, talking about the photographs and looking at the photographs and saying, where's the picture of that car? That really was from that moment. And so that was from 2018. And he was first diagnosed in 2015. So I think the first interview I did with him in his study in the basement, asking about the photographs, was from about 2015. It was a long answer.
When he looked at those photos, would he tell you the same story about the photo each time, or did this story change? Depends on where he was in his progression.
It really depended on where he was in his progression, and often the entry point would be the same story. And if he didn't tell me the story, I might share the story with him, and then that would kind of get the memory juices flowing, and then he would share some other stories.
Yeah.
And that was a great entry point for whenever anyone visited him, you know, friends and family. Like his brother came to visit him in 2018 in the summer from Israel. And they had the most marvelous connections looking at photographs from a small town they lived in during the war when they were probably about 6 and 10. And hearing those stories, and then hearing, I'd known my dad's version of the story for so long, and then hearing my uncle's perspective, which had a slightly different take on it, was like, no, that's not what happened there. You know, my uncle's a few years younger and very lucid and, you know, very with it, and be like, oh, no, Reiner, no, you got that all wrong. And my dad would just go,
It doesn't really matter whose interpretation was correct. The biggest part of that is that you got to talk and share and relationship building and inclusiveness and communication, all those good things, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that it was an argumentative family, is what my uncle told me. And so those arguments, you know, they still carried on, even, you know, as old men, which I found absolutely charming.
Excellent. Dr. Dixon, in that film clip, Reiner had a urinary tract infection. Can you expand on how a medical condition like this can lead to delirium or being cognitively confused, and what should be done?
Absolutely. So delirium is, like you mentioned, Linda, it's an acute change in thinking. It comes on very quickly. Some people are quite inattentive when they're delirious, difficulty to focus and pay attention to a task. You may see it fluctuate, so certain times may be worse, and then it seems to maybe be a bit better and then worsen again. And also there could be changes in someone's level of consciousness. So some people become quite agitated and might be up pacing, grabbing at things, picking at things. Other people are sleepy, so maybe dozing off during mid-sentence or sleeping more. So it's really hard. You have to be quite sensitive to changes. And often it's something that a family member will say, this is not my dad, or this is not my mom. And that's kind of a red flag for us that there's something worrisome going on. And people with dementia are at a risk for delirium, absolutely. And that could be caused by anything. Like Reiner had an infection, a urinary infection. So we always look at infections as a cause. It could be even a new medication, a change in medications. Also, even things like constipation can cause delirium. So there's a wide range of things that could be a cause. But I think the important thing for everyone to know is that it's a medical emergency. So for us, delirium is a medical emergency. It means you need to see a healthcare professional. Usually we direct people to the emergency department because they are going to need investigations like blood work, and to try to determine the cause and to treat it.
Excellent, thank you. One of the things that was intriguing in that clip, Hannah, was that you were texting relatives to keep them up to date. And I know from my own experience and from lots of clients' experience, that can be a burden in itself to try to keep family members up to date. Do you think the new technology that we've evolved, did that help you and keep everybody connected in ways that take a little bit of that burden off your shoulders?
It absolutely did. Linda, I was able to pour my heart out to friends and family. And for me, it was a real release. And I'm not a natural writer. You know, we have to do a lot of grant writing in photography and filmmaking. And I never enjoy that process. I like talking about my projects. And I really liked chatting with people on the phone, but there just wasn't time to talk to all of their family and friends. And so I adopted this, you know, my mom used to send out a Christmas letter to everybody every Christmas, and I would help her put all the photo collage together and photocopy it and get it all ready. And so this was like my round letter to everyone, but it went out just whenever I needed to tell everybody, you know, if there was a significant change, or just I felt the urge to write to them. And it was really liberating to be able to just pour my heart out. And so the excerpts that are in the film are taken from actual letters that I wrote to friends and family. And somebody I was talking to about making the film said what an important part of the story that they were, and that I absolutely should find a way to include them. And so having them pop up on the screen felt like a really natural way to make that happen. So it really looked like I was typing out an email in that moment. And then the responses were amazing. And I could feel that love from everybody coming to me and coming to our family. And I was able to share stories and photographs with both of my parents. Thank goodness for technology. You know, I filmed a lot of the film on my cell phone.
Wow.
Because it's unobtrusive, it's small. And then I had it with me at doctor's appointments. I could access all of the information that I needed. You know, I was in and out of Emerge with them, and also had a portable office. So when you're talking about technology, it was very, very useful.
Great. That's a great tip. I think we're going to move on to the last clip of tonight, and this focuses on the changes the family needed to make in order to provide safe care for Reiner. So we'll watch this last clip.
It's very difficult to think of last few remaining years. You never feel like that there is such a thing.
Who looked after the old people when you were growing up?
Or the next generation. In those days, families were quite large, and there were quite a number of uncles and aunts. There was Tante Anna, Tante Lieschen, Tante Lenchen. So today, with these small families, people are missing out on these aunts.
So who do you think is going to be looking after your generation and my generation as we get older?
Well, Mommy always says, God help us. Of course, your family looking after you isn't always easy for them either. It puts a great strain on some of them.
Dearest friends and family, I'm so relieved. We found a small private nursing home for Dad, and he will live there until the room becomes available at a provincial long-term care center.
You can't make a plan without having a specific location in view. At least I don't think I can do that. It's not always an easy situation. Not only that it's hard to let go, but you've had the idea of assembling all this lifestyle, and then suddenly you decide to throw it all away. Well, this is sort of not only tough, but I don't think that's was the intent when we arranged all those things that we have around us now, that you would need to give it up one day because you can't handle it. So this is a big change from when you're younger and you're always looking forward to achieving things and to making progress, and both of these words include some sort of expansion in some sort, either in accumulating more stuff or having a bigger house or going on bigger journeys, and then suddenly you have the opposite. You have a retraction as your future. It's very hard to express exactly this change, and also to find a way of accepting it. I think that's where Anne perhaps is slightly ahead of me.
Hello, we're here.
Daddy will most definitely go into a very strong period of decline and mourning.
Yes.
And I think that, once he's been there a while, he'll pull out of it.
Yes.
Just as, you and I will through this period of mourning. So long as I've got, I mean, my needs are so much less. So as long as I've got enough money to pay the taxes and the heating and the snow clearing, you know, basically that's it.
Yeah.
And I presume they can up the care for me from the what do you call it? Community services.
Yes, they can. Continuing care, yeah. You must be feeling lonely up there some days, Mum.
Yeah, it's very lonely, and you know, I thought, oh well, I'll adjust to it. You know, perhaps you and Sophia can come and stay over once a week or something. Or...
I would love that.
Welcome back. Again, the film clips get a little harder to watch, but I think, you know, the gift of the film, Hannah, is that you were able to document your family's journey, and we see a real family going through many transitions, and it gives us all time to reflect and to talk, and it's a great piece to launch our discussion. So I'm going to start with Dr. Dixon on this question, give you a little bit of break there, Hannah. So the decision for long-term care is never easy. What are some of the signs that someone is needing a different level of care that family can't provide? Because I know this is a decision that families don't take lightly and that they struggle with.
Absolutely, and that's a really good question. I found that last clip was heartbreaking, and it really is. There's a grief that comes along with it. It's such a loss of your home at that time, and I thought the way Reiner described it was beautiful. That you know, you're expanding, and then all of a sudden it's a retraction. And I thought that was a really beautiful way to explain it, and it was really heartbreaking. It's a difficult decision, as you can see, for families. Some of the signs, and I think it's very person specific again, I know I say that a lot. Some of the signs might be, you know, the big one is caregivers. So how's the caregiver doing? It takes such a toll, the care level as dementia progresses, and people need more hands-on help with things like bathing and dressing and toileting. And often it may be a time when the caregiver's health may also deteriorate and they can't provide that level of care at home, or that the services in the community that we try our best to put in all of the community resources possible, but there comes a time when somebody's care needs exceed that. Another sign may be safety. So personal safety, if somebody's up and leaving that, trying to leave the home at night, wandering, at risk of being lost or hurting themselves, that may be a sign. So often it's looking at what the care needs are. Are there nursing needs? So there comes a time when some people do need nursing level care that can't be put in place in the home. And overnights, I think, are quite hard for families, as Hannah identified as well. So I think looking at all those factors and trying our best to put every support in place we can to keep people in their own homes as long as possible with as much independence as possible. And also all along that you're navigating some level of risk. So families often worry, well, what if he wanders outside and gets lost? What if he falls? And sometimes those things haven't happened yet. And so we talk a lot about the dignity of risk. And so we can't bubble wrap everyone. And we do live and navigate a certain level of independence that comes with an acceptable level of risk. But as we put supports in place and try to follow people through their journey with dementia, often there will come a point when the level of care just exceeds what's able to put in. So I think that was a long answer, but it's very patient specific, and looking at the care needs, looking at the health of the family and the caregivers is very important, and then assessing risk and safety, but also accepting some degree of risk as well.
One of the comments in the chat was that, does the health and the mental health of the caregiver come into play as someone progresses through the disease?
Absolutely. I think Hannah could probably speak to that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, in this case, the primary caregiver for my dad initially was my mom, and then she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And we had already, before that diagnosis, been looking at and putting dad on a wait list for a provincial nursing home, because it does take quite some time, up to 2 or 3 years, to find a place. And even in the private homes, it can take a while. And so the advantage with the provincial nursing home for my parents is that it had a very flexible rate. It's a copay system. And so that made it affordable for them, and really was a huge relief of stress for both of them. Finances, even though they were fine because they had lived through the war and had very poor moments in their lives, finances were a huge stress for them. So knowing that they could afford this care was really important. The interim care where dad went was outrageously expensive for them. It was comparatively expensive to any other private nursing home. So that was, mom was very stressed about that. And when she heard that dad was gonna, be okay and eventually get into a home, and she could then accept that. So the stress mentally for her was extraordinary. And then to know that she was dying herself on top of that, and that she wouldn't be able to look after my dad for as long as she would like to in their home. And as long as he probably would have wished, that was an added burden for her. And she felt really lonely when he was gone. She was a strange mixture of, oh, thank goodness, I don't have to shout, I've got my voice back, because she was always having to repeat herself, because not only was dad hard of hearing, but as Dr. Dixon mentioned earlier, cognitively, the understanding is not always there for the person with dementia. So my mom was exhausted, and she just slept for a week, I think, almost day in, day out when my dad left.
When he moved into the other facility.
Yeah, when he moved into the home. And I think part of that was she herself was mourning. She was really lonely, but she was finally able to relax and just let go. And that beginning of her letting go and relaxing really enabled me to look after her and for her to accept care as she progressed through her own stages of dying. And that ended up allowing for a really beautiful experience with our whole family, so we could be right there with her when she died.
Thank you for sharing that. This next question is sort of ties in a little bit about what you were saying earlier. So we know that everybody's experience with dementia is different. And in your dad's case, he was aware of the changes, and he was able to express in words his grief of leaving the family home. How did your family cope with that, with his grief of him able to express it? He was sad, he had to leave his family home, he knew he wasn't coming back.
My dad was really amazing, Linda, about that whole process. And he never, ever expressed that to anyone else except for, probably my mom and me, and maybe to John and one or two close neighbors who became really close friends. And he never once complained. He never once said he regretted anything. He never lashed out. He wasn't angry. I know he was deeply upset that it had to happen and that he had to leave this home that he'd spent the last 10 years building. My parents moved from Montreal to Nova Scotia when my daughter was born in 2008. And he loved his life here, and knew that he'd be really missing that home. And my parents loved the outdoors. And so at every opportunity, they would go somewhere and go exploring. And they didn't just like being outdoors, they liked to study every minute detail of nature, birds, plants, the water. And so they were very in tune with that experience and really relished it as an opportunity to get out and get away. So that was really a great mental break for both of them when we could get out and be outside in nature.
Great. The next question is, we know that dementia is a long journey. It takes anywhere between 10 and 12 years, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. And there's losses and changes that occur all through the disease. What helped your family make the decision when it was time to take your dad and move him into the long-term care? What kinds of things helped your family make that decision?
Visiting the place and meeting the owner and the caregivers, initially of the private nursing home. And then prior to that, Mom and I had spent quite a lot of time visiting a number of local nursing homes in the Dartmouth area. And being able to see and imagine him in that place and to meet some of the staff was really important for my mom. And that enabled her to be okay with making the decision to let Dad go, because she knew he would be in really good hands. The first place that he went, the staff there made home-cooked meals. And so my dad actually put on weight. He put on about 10 pounds while he was living there because the food was delicious. And he was very relaxed when he was there, and so ate very well. So that really helped my mom to make that decision. And for my dad, it was just seeing that my mom couldn't help him in any way. She could help him less and less. Emotionally, she could be there for him, but physically, she needed a walker herself, and he could see that she was declining, and that was really painful for him. And we brought him home every Sunday, and then sometimes in between as well, or we'd bring my mom out if she was well for coffee, because the place he was staying was actually in a condo building that had a coffee shop on the main floor. So we could go up and bring him down, and then Mom would sit in the coffee shop and they could get together and have a date, which was really sweet. So I think that physically seeing the places, meeting the people, being able to, see a room, to walk around the space, and to know that my dad was going to be in good hands, and to understand and let go of the fact that, this was just another phase of life and another change. And they'd gone through a lot of changes, having lived through the Second World War, and each of them losing a lot and moving as immigrants to a new country and moving a bunch of times. So it was just one more step in their journey.
So I'm going to ask Dr. Dixon the same question, because we know here at the Alzheimer's Society, we know the transition isn't always that easy. So Dr. Dixon, do you have any strategies for families when the transition is harder, when it doesn't go as smoothly and it's upsetting for the person who's being moved and upsetting for the family who are remaining behind? Any suggestions on how to help with that transition?
I don't think I have anything to add. I think what Hannah said was beautiful. I think as much as you can kind of bring somebody and introduce the concept, for other families that might not work as well. Sometimes that can be a little stressful, and the move happens, and people may not remember what came before it. So for different people in different stages of the disease, sometimes preparing them for something doesn't work as well. And for other families who have insight into, if the person with dementia has insight into what's happening, that preparation can really help. The familiarity of having someone's things there with them is helpful, and the regular visits is helpful. But it's a very difficult process for a lot of people on the person and their family. Yeah, it's a tricky thing.
Yeah. It's recognized across the country how tricky it can be. So I just want to put a plug in here for Alzheimer's Society of Canada's. We have some pamphlets on making the move, visiting, a series of different education pieces that might help with families, because this can be a very difficult time.
I think too, in the same way, I'm sorry, Hannah, in the same way that we prepare for moves and other changes and losses, so loss of license or all of these things, it helps too if the care team around the patient and family talk about these things early on, and talk about wants and wishes and what that would look like. It's not an if, it's a when for most people. Right. And so if you start thinking about it early and planning for it early, it's not as shocking, hopefully. And I think we do our best to try to support families. And I think having those early discussions and thinking about what the future might look like, how we can support people, and what level, at what point they think for them it might mean that a change needs to happen to go to long-term care. I think having those discussions early on with your family physician, geriatrician, whoever you're seeing on a regular basis, to have those discussions and make that as a regular part of dementia care.
Great. Hannah, did you want to say something?
I did. When you mentioned the Alzheimer's Association handouts and resources, I realized that I haven't actually addressed what an important role Alzheimer's Nova Scotia played in the Partners in Care team for my parents and for me. We had somebody call us. It was at as often as I wanted or as Mom wanted. And so sometimes it was once a week, sometimes it was once a month. Over the course of about 3 years from my dad's diagnosis, he would call the home and check in and say, how are things going? Do you need anything? What kind of resources? Are you frustrated with anything? How can I help you out? And it was someone who not only could listen and listen beautifully and empathize, but who was a wealth of knowledge. And if they didn't have the knowledge, they would look for the answers and call back. And that was such a gift, especially to my mom. That was really important for her. And it was a place where I could call and express my frustrations with things that weren't going well, like when Mom would cancel the help, or when we just weren't getting anywhere with certain facets and other partners in care. And I could just say, I'm really, these are my apples, but these are my onions. Like, this is not working. How do I get past this? We were very fortunate in having a very patient and understanding and quiet person that we were caring for in my dad. He didn't freak out or act out or rebel against the move, or if he did so, it was very quiet because he understood there just was no other option. And I know that's not the same story for a lot of other families, and for people in my extended family, that's not been the story either. But really, Alzheimer's Nova Scotia volunteers and staff, and a conference that you put on, my parents went to when Dad was quite well still, was exceptionally helpful for both of them, because it gave them the platform to have those conversations and to start being prepared for when, not if.
Thank you for the plug. And I'll put a plug in for our InfoLine team. There's fantastic and very caring and informed people. So we'll put that number up at the end of the evening. We're open the floor now to any questions you have for either of our guests. So we encourage you to put your questions in the chat line, and we'll try to get to them as many as we can in the next few minutes. While we're waiting, Dr. Dixon, I have a question for you. In the film, Reiner has Lewy body dementia, but the film doesn't really focus on the disease. But what it does spectacularly is focus on the family's experience through the transitions. So could you give some resources for people who maybe have Lewy body and specifically what they could do to find out more about Lewy body dementia?
Absolutely. I think we'll put in a plug for the Alzheimer's Society as well, because the national website, alzheimer.ca, has information on Lewy body dementia, printable, downloadable brochures that you can have. And so people who want to provide information for family members can also go on there, print them out information and give it. There's links on there for the Lewy Body Dementia Association and all sorts of other resources. So I think, honestly, if we could put that link up in the chat, that's probably one of the best places to go as a starting point for more information on Lewy body dementia in a really accessible way.
Great, thank you. So here's a question that just came in. Hannah, what's one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when your father was progressing through the disease? So, yeah.
Oh, wow, that's a great question. I don't know. We were so well prepared by everybody that there were very few surprises. And I did a lot of reading online during the nights when I couldn't sleep because I was worried about stuff, things on my mind. You know, I would just do lots of research. And for both my mom's pancreatic cancer and for my dad with his Parkinson's and Lewy body, we were so well prepared by the Partners in Care team that, and things always unfold in a slightly different path for each person. Mm-hmm. But those clear markers, you know, Dad would, he hit them all right from the beginning, where he was unable to figure out the taxes all of a sudden. And that's really what alerted Mom to something being really wrong, is that he just got so muddled with numbers, and it was comprehension. And he got more sleepy during the day and more withdrawn, more wooden in his face, more stuttery with his steps. Initially, they thought it was just Parkinson's. Then, you know, a neurologist said, I think this is also Lewy body, and they often coexist. You know, later on, he did experience, well, actually early on, he experienced the hallucinations. They initially were very mild and quite amusing. So he would see faces all over the place. My daughter at the time was 10, and her favorite story to tell is when my dad and my mom were sitting at their kitchen table having supper, and Dad said to Mom, Anne, he looked up, there's people on the ceiling. And Mom said, oh, yes. And he said, yes. I don't like them at all. And Mom said, oh, no. And so my dad then said, no, they're spitting on me. And so, you know, my mom told Sophie-Anne that story, and Sophie-Anne thought it was absolutely hysterical. And so we didn't laugh at Dad if he was in that moment, but some of them really were very funny. And he could see how funny it was when we said, oh, remember that time you saw people spitting from the ceiling? He'd be like, oh, that was really weird. But then it got to the point where he was frustrated because he said, I don't know if this is real or not real. Did I dream it? Did I not dream it? And he would still say that right up until the end of his life. And his hallucinations, unfortunately for him, got less and less funny, and more, it felt like wartime memory based, and really upsetting for him. And it was upsetting for me to hear them because of the terrible things that were happening to him in this hallucinations. And mostly to hear about how upset he was by them. He always thought that, you know, one of us had died, or that we were going to be killed, or that he was going to be killed, or that they were doing some weird radiation treatment, and that there was some guy with a notebook walking around the home taking notes, and he was next on the list. he kept telling him, "You're next on the list." So those were really upsetting for him. However, because I knew that that was one of the many steps in the disease, I could at the same time that I was asking for his medication to be maybe adjusted, or for any stressors to be removed, or his diet to be revised, or to have more walks or something to help him through that, I could say, okay, this is one of those markers. And it means we're just that much further along in this journey. So being so well prepared and so well informed was very helpful, because I could then empathize with my dad. I could feel all those hard emotions, and at the same time, take a step back and say, this is normal, this is all right, it's difficult. 5 minutes later, or even right in the middle of that conversation, my dad would say, "Oh, so how's your filming going?" So I knew it hadn't necessarily impacted him as much as I thought it might have. Sometimes it did, but not always.
That's a great segue into one of the questions we got through the chat Q&A line for Dr. Dixon. Lewy body isn't a well-known dementia. Can you just tell us a couple of the symptoms that make it maybe unique from the other dementias, so that if anybody out there is wondering what Lewy body is all about?
Sure. So the diseases of Lewy body dementia and Parkinson's disease dementia are thought to be on a similar spectrum. So if somebody has Parkinson's disease for quite some time and then develops memory trouble or cognitive impairment, then we may call that Parkinson's disease dementia. Sometimes people develop cognitive changes at the very same time or within a year of developing some of the motor symptoms. We call them a Parkinson's disease. So the stiffness, the slowness, sometimes changes in their walking. And when they happen quite close together like that, it's called Lewy body dementia, but they're likely two diseases that are on the same spectrum of disease. Some of the early changes, that was just the way that Hannah described it, the difficulty with taxes. So people might have difficulty with numbers, with their organization, their planning, their multitasking, some changes in their visual spatial perception, as opposed to other dementias that might present with memory impairment and short-term memory impairment. So that may be absent in the early stages of Lewy body dementia. We see the Parkinsonism. So some people develop maybe a stooped posture or a shuffling gait, some slowness, sometimes tremor, not as often, but it can be there. There can be falls. There can be quite significant fluctuations, so really kind of up and down cognition and memory and thinking. And the visual hallucinations, that's something that's quite common. It can happen to people quite early in the disease course. And people are often uncomfortable talking about it. I think it can be a bit embarrassing, actually. And when we ask people about this in clinic, they're often relieved that you've asked, and they can say, I think I see, faces and things would be very common. People, animals would be some of the common hallucinations. And then there can be more complex type delusions that can be very, very distressing. So it's really important that people share that with their healthcare provider and their healthcare team, because it's something that we need to talk about and be open about, but that can happen quite early on in this disease too. So those are some of the features, and there are many others, but often people have what's called a REM sleep behavior disorder. So they may have decades before that where they've acted out dreams, yelled, kicked, cried in the night. And that sometimes comes before Lewy body dementia. It also happens in Parkinson's disease. So that's something we always ask about. But there are a few features that makes it a little different from Alzheimer's dementia or vascular dementia. And it has specific things that we look for and ask about.
This question segues into that as well. So someone asks, how do you know what sort of dementia it is that your person has, and the best care and treatment for them? So I think that's a big thing. There are different types of dementia. How do you know if you have Lewy bodies or Parkinson's dementia or Alzheimer's disease?
Absolutely. And that's why when you see somebody, if you have concerns, that you bring them to your nurse practitioner or family physician. They may do some of the memory testing themselves, or sometimes they're referred on to geriatric medicine, and we do cognitive testing there. Neurology also would get a lot of Lewy body dementia too. But we do really a big interview with the family and patient to hear about a history of what the changes were, and do memory testing that look at all sorts of domains. So look at your memory, your short-term memory, but also your concentration, your executive function, your visuospatial function, withdrawing tests, and language fluency. So we look at all that to try to detect the pattern of loss that's suggestive. And a physical exam is very helpful as well. And we do all of that together, which often leads us to what type of dementia it is. Sometimes we need to do extra tests like brain imaging. So people may often have a CAT scan or even an MRI to look for different patterns. Although dementia is not diagnosed by those tests, it's a clinical diagnosis that we do in the office after our history and physical and memory testing. And we can try to tell from there what type of dementia it is, and then best support that patient and their family and decide on treatment from there.
Thank you. We have a compliment here for Hannah. Thank you for your gift in educating those who witness this journey. The opportunity to learn from your firsthand experience is powerful. So I just wanted to read that out. Did you have a comment, Hannah?
I did. Thank you so much for that compliment. It's really meaningful. And I think the greatest gift that this film, for me personally has is that it's the story of my parents. And, I have this story that I can share with my daughter and with our family. And it also can be used as a learning tool, just like we are tonight, to start a conversation and have a conversation. What I was going to say is in direct response to Dr. Dixon about how important it is for that family contribution to the story of the person who you're concerned about that may or may not have dementia, or what kind of cognitive things are happening. If you're noticing things that are odd or inconsistent, make a note of them, because it might be many years until you see the same thing again, or until you start putting several things together and go, wait a minute, we should check this out. And you will have forgotten when they happened or what exactly happened. So I used my Google Calendar and just would write a few notes in, or I used a specific document where I kept notes about my dad's health. And I would just make notes of things that I was changing. Was there a change in his, he often talked about his bowel movements. He wasn't shy about talking about any of that. Were there changes that I noticed in his cognition, or was he sleeping more? Was he getting agitated? And when was that happening? And why was that happening? I was lucky enough to be seeing them multiple times a week for the whole time that they lived here. And so I could be very observant in that way. So between my mom and I, we were able to provide a really great backstory, because usually the patient is like, well, I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. Why am I here? Well, so I just can't do the taxes anymore. I'm 80. What do you expect? So
that's a great point to keep a journal.
Be really confident in your knowledge. You really are the expert in your family about your family history. And when you're seeing something that's not normal, like when Dr. Dixon was talking earlier about certain moments being, that the word has just escaped me, when Dad had his urinary tract infection. Yes. In those moments when you were saying that's actually a medical emergency, when people experience that, you know that that's something really different. And so don't let any care practitioner, whether it's a paramedic or a doctor or anybody, pressure you into thinking that you're wrong. Really trust your instinct. We were fortunate to have, very good support from everyone, but the kinds of questions that they ask you might make you wonder, well, am I imagining this? But that's, those moments when something is changing. So really trust that and know that you are the expert.
I was sorry. I was just going to say that I absolutely agree, Hannah. And that's what I often say to families in the clinic, where you are the expert in your family. You're the expert in your mom or dad. So those observations are key, and they really help the team make the diagnosis and help shape treatment plans. And there's a website, thisisnotmymom.ca, that Nova Scotia Health Authority made a few years back about delirium awareness, because that phrase is so key for us when somebody says, this is not my mom or this is not my dad. And it raises awareness also for us as healthcare professionals to know, listen, trust people, trust their families. If this is not normal, we need to look into it, and you need to find out why. So it's something we take very, very seriously. And I just wanted to say thank you for advocating for your father, and that's so important. And taking records and notes all becomes very useful for us to look through and see the progression and how things have changed. Because really, dementia, the diagnosis of dementia, you need a functional change. You need, it's not just memory impairment, it's a memory impairment with a functional change. So something that they could do last year that they cannot do this year, or they could do 2 months ago that they cannot do now, and that may be taxes. And it's something that we just have to look back in time and look at that story. And the experts are really the family and those closest to them.
So the take-home message for tonight is, you out there are the experts of your family member. And unfortunately, this has been a great discussion, but this brings us to near the close of tonight. I'd like to take a few moments to thank Truffaut Films for allowing us to showcase some of the footage in the film tonight. Special thanks to our guest, Hannah Minzloff, for sharing her personal insight tonight, and to Dr. Alison Dixon for sharing her medical knowledge and expertise. By exploring and discussing this one family's experience with dementia, we can recognize and acknowledge both similarities and differences from our own. This film can be a helpful tool to begin conversations like the one we had here tonight. How difficult the emotional journey is on the person with dementia, their care partner, the family, particularly around times of transitions, like when help is needed or when you need to go into a long-term care facility. A link to this recording will be sent out to all the participants who have registered for tonight or on the call tonight as well. You will have access to the recording for the next month if you wish to watch it again. If you'd like to see the entire film, go to Vimeo on demand, and the website is on the screen, and you'll get that slide in your recording when you get it. You can also attend an in-person screening at the Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21 in Halifax on January 13th. We also want to remind you that a week from today, October 28th, is our Alzheimer's Society of Nova Scotia Provincial Conference. And the theme this year is supporting dementia in all its diversity. We have a great lineup of speakers, and there's still time to sign up, so we encourage you to join us, especially for family caregivers who have attended tonight and have used one of our services, one of our InfoLine services or First Link programs over the last 18 months. We've set aside some spots for you that are free in honor of Dr. John Gray, one of the founders of the Alzheimer's Society of Nova Scotia, who passed away earlier this year. If you're interested in that, tomorrow call our InfoLine number 1-800-611-6345, and we will get you your pass into the conference. And last but not least, and there's 2 more slides, is that if you are out there and you have more questions or you want to connect with us, please call our helpline. We're here to help, 1-800-611-6345. And now we're going to have an anonymous poll pop up on your screen. Please take a moment to let us know your feedback from tonight. It really does help us plan events. Also, if you want to add additional comments in the Q&A box in the bottom, we'll leave it open for a few more minutes, and we'll get to those comments tomorrow. So I want to thank you, Hannah, thank you, Dr. Dixon, for a fabulous night, very informative. Thank you for sharing everything. Everybody out there, have a good night. And